Welcome everybody. As we said just a moment ago, if you're able to turn on your cameras, please do. It just makes it nice if we can see each other. I'm Rabbi Sachs. I'm the Associate Rabbi at Beth Tikva here in Toronto. And some of you know me, but it's wonderful because we actually have a few different groups together with us on this call for this program tonight. We have Beth David, Adith Israel, and Beth Emet B'nai Yehuda as well participating, along with Hasbara. So why did we think this was important to do? We started planning this before the recent ceasefire came into effect, but this last few weeks have only exacerbated what so many of us know already, which is that the world is not a friendly place to Israel. And with social media, it's more and more difficult and painful sometimes to go on and see friends, community, people you know, people you respect, even celebrities jumping on the Bash Israel bandwagon. And I've always been a strong believer in Israel and in the idea of Zionism. I spent 2 years living in Jerusalem, which were just some of the most amazing years of my life. But I just want to share very briefly part of my own thought, long before I was even a rabbi or thinking about becoming a rabbi, of why I think Israel is so important and what our role as Jews is to Israel. I remember when I was in high school, all of my friends were going on USY trips and other youth trips or camp trips and going to Israel. My parents didn't want me to go. And I was so sad because they would come back and they would get to go on the Bima and share these amazing stories of their Israel moment. They cried when they first stepped out in Ben Gurion Airport, or when they got to touch the Kotel, the Western Wall. And I was so excited in my third year of university when I finally was going on Birthright. It was the winter of, I want to say 2009. And it for me was a really special trip. I could not wait to finally get my magical Israel moment. I've been looking forward to it forever and ever. And we got to the plane on El Al's landing, and we start descending, and all I see is desert and cities here and there, and it didn't tear me up. And we got out at the airport. I was just shocked at how hot it was in the middle of December. And later, as we got to Jerusalem and our bus pulled up, rather than, again, feeling that immense spirituality, I was just surprised with how many cats there were out and about. And the same thing, we got to the Kotel. It was so crowded. And later on, the Kotel, actually, I spent many days by the Kotel when I was living in Israel and the old city, and absolutely love it. But on this touristy trip, I didn't feel that moment yet. And it was the last couple of days in our trip. We were at a random mall up north where we stopped at the food court as we were driving from one destination to another. And it was there in between the destinations, Bamidbar, I guess, right? That's where things happen, that I finally had my magical Israel moment that I was worried I was going to get cheated out of because it had been so long into the trip when it finally happened. We were at a mall, and I realized as we're walking around and going from different food court places that song after song after song they were playing was Hanukkah music. And for me, it was so special to experience that because it was December 25th. It was Christmas Day. And here I was at a mall, and there wasn't a little Hanukkah tucked away somewhere in a corner next to a giant Christmas tree and people lining up to take pictures with Santa Claus and the occasional dreidel thrown in after hours of the same Christmas music. And don't get me wrong, I love a good Christmas carol, but there was something about, for the first time ever in my life, feeling that I wasn't the other. The only time I'd ever experienced that before really was at Jewish summer camp, because I went to public school and a university. I was very active in Jewish groups, but still lived very much in a non-Jewish world. And there I was in this mall, and it was the first time I ever felt that way. And that I wasn't the other, that I was there, I was with my people, I was where I belonged. And it was an incredibly special feeling. And that to me is why Israel is so special to me and so important to me, because we need a place like that. If anything we've learned in the way Israel's been portrayed online and in the news and everything else the last few weeks, is that we need a place where we're not the other. We need a place that looks out for everyone, but that includes Jews, and that is there for us, and that is our homeland, a place that we always belong, no matter what. And that's where I felt that, in a random mall on Christmas Day, somewhere in the middle of northern Israel, going on a bus from one place to another. And when I came back, I would speak to on my university campus and different Jewish organizations about Israel. I always said that it's not our job as Jews to support everything Israel does, but it's our job as Jews to know the facts so we can correct them when they're wrong. Because a couple days later, we woke up one morning and all of a sudden the soldiers that were on our bus were gone because they'd been called back to duty. It was, Israel went into Gaza. And we woke up to the news that the soldiers had left. And later that day, we saw images and pictures. And we got back from our trip back to our school. It's all anyone would talk about, what was happening in Israel and the violent Israeli soldiers and what they were doing. And these were my friends. These were people that I had bonded with for the last 10 days or 8 days on this bus trip. We drank coffee together. We hung out together. We joked. We laughed. These were people my age. They were also my age, except instead of university, they were risking their lives to defend our homeland. And that to me was the moment that I really decided that I was going to do my part as much as I could, since I wasn't going to go to Israel and put on a uniform, but I could at least outside of Israel make sure that I was educated enough to stand up when people spread lies, when they called these people, these kids that were my age, murderers and all sorts of other awful names. So we wanted to put this program on for our high school students and some of our other teens and university students in our communities, because it's been very painful the last few weeks, everything going on. And it's important that you have the tools to respond and the ability to respond, and also a place to share how you felt with everything going on. And you've heard enough from me right now, because we brought in an expert on it. We brought in Pearl from Hasbara. She is their high school teen fellow leader. I mixed up the title already. She'll correct you and tell you exactly what her job title is and more about Hasbara. But all I can tell you is they do incredible work going out and being Israel's voice in the community and helping people like you and me find our voice to speak up for our homeland. So Pearl, thank you so much for joining us. I'll turn it over to you now. We're gonna do a presentation and we'll have some time at the end for questions from those of you who are with us. So please enjoy.
All right, thank you so much. That was a really beautiful introduction. Yeah, so my name's Pearl. I am the high school advisor for Hasbara Fellowships Canada. And at Hasbara, we train high school and university students in how to advocate for Israel. So it looks a little bit different at the high school and university level. At the university level, we take trips to Israel for 2.5 weeks of intensive on-the-ground training where students are exposed to all different perspectives on religion, security, politics, culture, and kind of everything in between, so that when they come back to campus, they're really able to speak as experts and as people who have had firsthand experiences, rather than just, I read this, I saw this online, I heard this from someone. And so that's what we do at the university level. And at the high school level, we have students across North America who are learning all about Israel and all about advocacy, so that they're able to use those skills while they're in high school. A lot of them are very active on social media, using their advocacy skills. And then when they get to university, they're able to go in as leaders from the beginning. So that's a little bit about what we do. I'll tell you more at the end if anyone's interested in getting more involved. But for now, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Go. Okay, so we are going to be talking about kind of like an Israel Advocacy 101. As you know, I'm sure many of you are aware, there has been a lot of extremely, anti-Israel stuff going around, especially on social media and in the traditional media and the news. A lot of, false information or biased information or one-sided information. So I hope that by the end of this, you'll feel like you have some of the tools to be able to respond when you see these kinds of things to engage people in productive, effective conversations. And as Rabbi Sachs said, at the end, we will have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and then we'll have kind of a moderated Q&A at the end. The questions can be about the content, like about advocacy specifically. They can also just be about what's been going on. You know, I've had a lot of people in the Jewish community reaching out saying, there's so much, you know, so many different opinions online, so many different things I'm seeing, like what are the facts? And we've done a lot of research and kind of figured out a lot of that. So if you have questions about recent events or just kind of general Israel history questions, it can kind of be pretty open to whatever you would like to know. But to get started, what we're going to do is, this is sort of a small part of a larger workshop that we have called Communicating for Israel, where we really talk about practical skills and tools that you can use as an advocate for Israel. So I took a specific part of it that I think is very relevant to what's been going on, you know, in the last few weeks specifically. So we will get into that, and I'll try to kind of apply it to what has been going on, what's been going on in recent weeks. So the first thing to realize when we are talking about sort of Israel advocacy is, who are we actually advocating to? And this is based on a survey that we conducted a few years ago of students on North American college campuses, university campuses, and we asked them, are you, you know, would you describe your views as supportive of Israel, anti-Israel, or undecided? And what you can see here is that 8% said anti-Israel, 22% said supportive, undecided said 70%. This is from a few years ago, so it could have changed, but I don't think it's changed drastically. The important part here is that the vast majority of people are undecided. They're not all each completely neutral. Some of them might be leaning more one way to the other, or, you know, have certain biases, but overall, they're not willing to say that they're pro or anti-Israel. And the reason this is important is because this is where we're focusing our advocacy efforts. In general, engaging with the anti-Israel 8%, the people who are not going to change their minds, it's kind of a waste of time. It's like someone trying to, you know, convince us as people who are supporters of Israel, who are Zionists, that we should hate Israel. Like, it's not going to happen, hopefully. So, you know, occasionally people will have a win here and there, but it really takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And for most people, it can be very discouraging. At the same time, the core supporters, so there are times where we want to speak to them, you know, events like this, where we need to, you know, help people and teach them how to, you know, take their support further. But in general, we want to spend our time on the 70%, because that's where we can make a huge difference. And I think if there's anything we've learned from the last few weeks, it's that this small anti-Israel 8%, they're working really hard to convince the undecided to join their kind of anti-Israel camp. So we need to be working even harder to speak to the 70% and to, you know, explain our side of the story, our perspective. And on social media, I think we have a really big power to do this, because even when someone posts something and the person posting might be in the 8%, might be, you know, clearly anti-Israel, a lot of their followers, just based on statistics, are going to be in the undecided. So if you're writing a comment, you might not be trying to change their mind. They might be in this 8% that's not going to change. But if you can convince all of their followers, not necessarily that, you know, Israel is the best country on the planet and they should go to Israel, you know, you don't have, it's very hard in a comment to do that. But what we want to do is show that there's another side to the story, that they're not getting the full picture from whatever anti-Israel post they're seeing. So all we want to do is have people walk away saying, clearly there's more nuance here that I need to look into and that I need to learn about. And maybe I'll reach out to the person who said that, or to a Jewish friend that I have, but I need to learn more. And that's really our goal, especially on social media. You know, you don't want to be posting essays in the Facebook comments or in the Instagram comments, because people probably aren't going to read them. But we need to just show that there's more to the story and that they should really, you know, look into that. So that's just kind of background that's important. When we talk about advocacy, who are we actually talking about here? So we're really talking about speaking to the 70%. And something else that's kind of just important background before we actually get into, you know, the actual strategies and tips, is the difference between hasbara and education. So education is simply just teaching. It's giving over information. And this works well when speaking to people who are in the 22% that support Israel, right? We can just tell them anything about Israel and people will be like, oh, tell me more. I love Israel too. You know, we want to talk about it. But when we're dealing with the 70%, that's not enough, because they don't have a personal connection to Israel. So they're not going to care as much about it as we do. And so that's when Hasbara comes into play. So that's the name of the organization I work for, but it's actually a term that we kind of used in our name. And Hasbara, it means explanation in Hebrew, but it's kind of come in recent years to mean public relations, PR. The Israeli government has a department of Hasbara. It's their public relations department. So when you think about someone who works in public relations, they're not just simply, conveying information. They're doing it in a very strategic way. They're thinking, what information am I trying to get across? Who am I trying to get it across to? And what's the most effective way that I can reach them? And that's what we have to be doing when we're doing Hasbara, when we're talking to the 70%. It can't be as simple as just having a conversation the way that you might with your Jewish friends, your friends from shul, or wherever it is. It has to be much more kind of thought out and strategic. So that's where I'm going to give you a couple of tools right now to help with that. So the first thing is the ABC method. And this is basically a structure or a formula that we recommend to our students to use whenever they're engaging in any sort of dialogue about Israel. And as you're going to see, the point of this is to make sure that we're actually being heard, that people are, we can't guarantee, but we can try to give ourselves the best odds of actually being heard or our comment being read. And if you look at the ABC, so A stands for answer, acknowledge, address, B is bridge, broaden, build, and C is communicate. So everyone wants to jump to the C. When we see something anti-Israel or something that we know is incorrect, we want to just explain why that's the case. We want to say, here's the real story, or here's the other side that you're not seeing. And the C is something that we like, we just want to share our side. But I'm sure that you've all had conversations with people where you feel like they're not listening. And when you try to bring up an issue, they just sort of counter it with their own side. And it feels like they weren't listening. They were just thinking of their own response the whole time. And, I don't think anyone's really enjoys those kinds of conversations. You can let me know if you disagree. But people generally want to be heard. They want to be listened to. So that's the point of the ABC method. First of all, it makes people feel like they're being heard, but it also makes sure that we are listening. Because if you want to do this effectively, you actually have to listen to what the other person is saying. So the A is where we acknowledge what they said. So we can do a quick example. So if someone says, how come there are hundreds of dead people in Gaza? We don't really know the numbers of civilian but how come there are so many more people dying there than in Israel? That seems like a problem. So what I might want to do is jump to the C and explain why that's the case, and we'll get there. But we can't start there because it seems like they just told me that innocent people are dying and I don't care, which is not, first of all, it's not true, right? Sometimes we think that when we're advocating for Israel, we have to be like 100% on Israel's side in every single thing, and that we can't ever acknowledge that Israel's done anything wrong. We can't criticize. And really, then we just come across seeming like, robots. And usually it's not genuine because, nobody's perfect and no country's perfect. So if we're, feeling like that's how we have to be, it's not going to be so genuine. So we want to find some kernel of something they said that we can genuinely empathize with. So we're not blaming, we're not explaining, we're just giving a statement of acknowledgement of empathy. So in the example of, why are there so many people dying in Gaza? I would say, something like, it really breaks my heart when I see innocent people dying as a result of this conflict. I'm acknowledging, I heard what they said. I feel it, I get it. I'm not assigning blame. Again, that can come in the C. But the A is really just a statement to show that I'm listening and that I hear your side of the story. Then we go on to B. So we don't want to spend too much time in the A. It is important, but we don't want to have the whole conversation be about, their negative kind of claim. We do want to shift the focus. So B is where we really shift the focus and we say, we kind of bridge to another point, or we broaden. We might say, it's really important to look at the bigger picture and understand why the numbers are the way they are, or why the numbers are not a reliable indicator of who's at fault here, or something like that. So that would be the B. It's kind of just a focus shift. And then in your C, that's when you're really communicating what you want to say. So we do want to be spending most of the time in the C, right? We do want to be telling people, what we have to say on the issue, but it's important that we go through the steps of the A and the B. And I have to tell you, I have students coming to me all the time with help writing comments. They want to know how to respond to things. And the most common mistake that they make, it's not that they're giving the wrong information. It's not that they're, going about it the wrong way. They're just skipping the A. They're jumping straight to the C, because that's our tendency. Is we want, we get defensive, which makes sense. We love Israel and we're seeing Israel being attacked. Of course, we want to go to the C, but we really have to go through the A and the B in order for our C to actually be heard. So that is the ABC method. And now the question is, what is the C? What do we actually say? And that's where we're really going to focus for the rest of this little kind of session, and then we'll open it up. So there's something that we call the corollary messages, or we call them also the three main claims and counterclaims. And the idea here is that pretty much any claim that someone will make against Israel can fit under one of three broad categories, and that's what you see on the left. And each of these categories has an effective counterclaim. And I'm going to explain, more in depth what the claims are and why the counterclaims work. But just to kind of explain why we even need these claims is because, and some of you may have had this experience before, where you're in a conversation with someone or you see something online and you get so upset about it because it's not true and it's, spreading misinformation and hateful information about Israel. But sometimes in the moment, it can be really hard to come up with a response. And that could be for two reasons. One is because we don't know what to say. We genuinely just don't know the information. But I think more often than that, it's that we know too much and we care too much. Like, we love Israel. We know so much about Israel that we want to give over to this person who clearly has, a misinformed understanding or a partial understanding of what's going on there. And it's almost, I know so much. How do I only have, a couple of minutes with this person, or I only have a short comment. How do I actually know what to say? Like, what's going to make a difference to them? And that's, I think, where people get overwhelmed, is just they don't know, out of all the things they could say, what to say. So that's where this comes in handy, because when you can remember, and a lot of people will screenshot this slide, which is totally fine. When you can remember the three claims and easily and quickly identify in your brain, when you hear something about Israel, you can identify which claim it falls under and what the counterclaim is, then you have a much kind of narrower area of information that you're going to be pulling from when you respond. So it just kind of gets you to the right place quicker. So the three main claims, and again, we'll go into more depth and I'll show you examples, are excessive force. So saying that Israel is being overly harsh to, this is like the disproportionate argument. They're using disproportionate force, being too harmful to the Palestinians. And there we want to talk about the threat of terrorism. And again, I'm going to go into that in detail. How do we actually do that? The second claim is racism or apartheid. So saying that Israel is either a racist country, or that this has become much bigger recently, an apartheid state. So somewhere that actually has systemic, legal, racial system in place. And there we want to be talking about Israeli human rights and values. And then the third one is occupation. So saying that Israel, usually it's illegal occupation, what people are saying, that Israel is physically occupying land that they don't have the right to occupy. And that's where we want to talk about Israeli efforts for peace. So now we'll go into some examples and in depth how to use these three claims. So the first one is excessive force. So saying again that Israel is being too harsh, too harmful. This is when we talk about the disproportionate amount of deaths on each side, or we talk about any of Israel's actions just being unnecessarily harsh, given that, this is a lot of the time when people talk about how the Israeli army is so much more well-equipped, so much more, well-funded than Hamas, which of course, when you realize that they're being funded by Iran, is not true, but that's a common claim that is made. So how do we respond? So here we want to talk about the threat of terrorism that Israelis are under, and I'll tell you why. When people make the claim of excessive force, what they're trying to do, or what they genuinely think in their mind, is that we have two sides to this conflict, right? We have the IDF, the Israeli government, which is strong and powerful and well-funded and well-resourced. And then we have the Palestinian civilians who are innocent and suffering and poor. And while those things are both true, you can't compare the government of one country to the civilians of the other, right? We have to level the playing field and show people, if you want to talk about the IDF, we can do that, but we also have to talk about Hamas and who they're actually fighting on the other side. So we're kind of, showing how, and again, I know that you kind of know this information, and if you have questions, we can go into it in the Q&A. I want to tell you more just the strategies as opposed to the content, but, comparing the IDF's tactics, they sent, targeted, just to talk about the recent conflict, specific targeted bombings to specific known terror, locations. versus Hamas, which sent over 4,000 rockets indiscriminately into Israeli civilian areas. So if we want to compare the two armies, let's do that. Or if we want to compare the two governments, so what does Israel do to minimize civilian casualties? And what does Hamas do to minimize civilian casualties on their own side? Well, actually, they do things to maximize them. So that's one level where we can talk about this idea of excessive force and the threat of terrorism, the fact that Israel is facing a terrorist regime on the other side. Or we can bring it down to the level of the civilians. And I think this is where we can even have more of an impact is, okay, you want to talk about the innocent Palestinian civilians. You're right. They exist and their situation is horrible. But did you know that there are Israeli civilians too, who live in constant, under the constant threat of terror attacks from all borders? So really just making people realize, and we can bring the emotions into play here, that Israelis feel vulnerable. Israelis are, always on high alert, knowing that, the car could ram into them, or, terrorists could sneak into their homes at night, or all of these horrible things that happen. We need to make people realize that, because a lot of the time they just don't know, and they think that it really is just the IDF versus just the civilians. So here we really want to level the playing field and say, you can't have a conversation only about only about one side. We have to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So that is excessive force. Again, if you want to go into more detail, please put questions in the chat. The second claim is racism or apartheid. So here, again, we're talking about the fact that Israel is unjust, that Israel has an unequal society. If they're talking about racism, so they're talking generally more about usually it's more of kind of a cultural thing. If they're talking about apartheid, then that's actually something in the government. And, unfortunately, I used to say that, racism was the more common claim, but recently an organization called Human Rights Watch, which is extremely anti-Israel, published a report saying that Israel is guilty of apartheid. So now that's become much more common, and what people are saying on social media, in the news, all of these different places. So they're kind of two sides of the same coin. One is just a more extreme version of the same claim. And here, what we want to be talking about is Israeli human rights and values. So the first thing is that, yes, we can acknowledge there's racism in Israel. That we're not disputing that. There happens to be that there's also racism in every democratic country with, different minorities. That doesn't mean that it's okay. That doesn't mean that we're, happy about that. But to single Israel out as a racist country is not accurate if we're not going to, look at it in the context of all of the other countries that we could be comparing it to. But, that being said, we have to respect, we can't just say, yeah, you're right, there's racism. So, but how do we kind of shift, that might be your A, but then how do we shift the conversation? So here's where we can really talk about Israeli human rights and values, because most people who have no connection to Israel, I think that they really picture Israel as just this like war zone, or this kind of desert with nothing going on. And we can really tell them, and if you've been to Israel, this is a great time to bring in personal experiences, riding on the light rail in Jerusalem, and you see people of all religions and colors and, races and ethnicities, and they're all together. If you look at the Israeli Knesset, there are parties representing Arabs, religious Jews, non-religious Jews, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, like there's everything, right? Israel is a democracy. It's a tolerant society. You can find every type of food, every type of religious community. All citizens are equal. There's no, two kind of class system in Israel. So really just pointing people to all of the kind of beautiful values that Israel has, that we know Israel has, that they just don't know. They really don't know. So here we're really focusing on the human rights and values of Israel, comparing them to, the human rights and values in any other Western country, in any other democracy, and really just kind of trying to get that message across. When it comes to apartheid, like actual apartheid, if they're saying that there's a legal, discrimination going on, so then you could get more into the legal side of things. And, if anyone's in a conversation like that, you can reach out to me. I have some different articles that basically refute the claim of apartheid and show how the paper that was just published is completely full of basically just misinformation and misinterpretations of things. But usually with most people, we can sort of speak more to the values and the human rights as opposed to like the nitty-gritty laws. It depends a little bit who you're talking to. And then the third claim is occupation. So saying that Israel is physically in land that it does not have the right to be in. And this is something very common as well, saying Jews are colonialists, that Jews came in the 1800s and stole this, land that had been Palestine. Any claim like that, Israel has illegal settlements or illegal occupation, that would all fall under this claim. And the first thing here is to identify what the person is actually speaking about, like what land are they talking about as being occupied, because your answer will be a little bit different. So sometimes they're talking about the land that Israel gained in the 1967 war, the Six-Day War. So that would be Gaza, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem. Other times they're talking about the entire country of Israel. So that's when someone says, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means the entire country of Israel will become a Palestine, or free Palestine is sort of a shortened version of that claim. It's saying that the whole land should be freed from the Jews and belong to the Palestinians. So it's important to clarify with people, if possible, what they're actually speaking about. If they're talking about the entire country of Israel, so if they're talking about the entire, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat too. It's a good question. If they're talking about the entire country of Israel, so then that's actually an anti-Semitic claim. According to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which is the most widely accepted definition around the world. It's been adopted by over 30 countries, by Canada, by Ontario, by lots of universities and companies and school boards. So saying that Israel does not have the right to exist at all in any borders, that is anti-Semitism. Denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination in our indigenous homeland, that is an anti-Semitic claim. And you can explain that to people. It's not really, you can get into the history if you want, but they should really understand that what they're saying is anti-Semitism. And that's obviously not acceptable. If they're talking about the land that Israel gained in the 1967 war, what's sometimes called the 1967 borders, the Green Line, anything like that. So they're referring to specifically the occupied territories, anything like that. So that's where we can have more of a conversation. And there's sort of two paths that you can take. You could go the more kind of legal historical route if you want. And I can address that again in the Q&A if people are interested. But generally, when you're talking, especially, for those of you who are teens and you're talking to your classmates, they don't know anything about international law. They're not really concerned with that. They're more concerned with the stories that they're hearing that Israel stole Palestinian land. So here, what we can really focus on is the fact that Israel wants peace. Israel has made so many efforts for peace, and we have, a lot of Israel made peace with Jordan. Israel made peace with Egypt. At one point, they were both enemies. I'm sure, there are people here who are alive who remember, we never would have thought that was possible. And for those of us maybe who are a little bit younger, hearing that Israel would make peace with the UAE, with Morocco, that just happened in the past year, I never would have thought that that would have happened, and then it did. So clearly, we have examples to show that Israel is willing to make peace. Israel has offered a Palestinian state in over 90% of the West Bank. They've already given up Gaza. They pulled out in a really big, bold move for peace, and it didn't happen. So what we really need to point people's attention to here is that Israel wants peace. Israelis want peace. If you think about it, if anyone's been seeing footage from the different rallies that have been going on, the pro-Israel rallies and then the sort of pro-Palestine rallies, which usually turn into just anti-Israel rallies. If you look at the kind of pro-Israel rallies, you're seeing calls for peace, for two states, for dialogue. That's what you're seeing on social media too. And then when you look at, what's going on kind of the opponents of Israel, you're seeing calls for, ethnic cleansing of the Jews, for intifada, for, lighting Israeli flags on fire, for, what's the swastikas. Like you're seeing, that doesn't look like peace. That's not how we build peace. So really what we want to do here is kind of show people, as much as Israel wants peace and has successfully made peace with many of its Arab neighbors, you need to have a partner, right? You need to have someone on the other side who's willing to extend that olive branch and actually work with you on this. And Israel, when it comes to the Palestinians, unfortunately, so far, we haven't had that. We haven't had that partner who was willing to, genuinely negotiate and make concessions and sort of, negotiate in the way that we would need to make peace. So that's really where we want to have the focus when it comes to occupation. Israel, again, you can get into the legal side, but I don't think that's usually what people want to talk about. But the fact that Israel is willing to, no longer occupy certain areas, but it has to be for a genuine offer of peace and for an actual, some sort of assurance that there will be peace and that there will be safety. So those are the three main claims and counterclaims. In a minute, we will get to the questions. I just wanted to let you guys know if anyone is interested in getting more involved in Hasbara fellowships. This is specifically for high school students. We have an internship program. I'll put the link in the chat. Hasbara internship, there we go. So if anyone's interested for the next school year in getting more involved in Israel advocacy, learning, everything we have to offer in terms of skills and strategies and more of the facts as well. We learn about the United Nations. We learn about social media advocacy. We learn about Israeli politics, Israeli international aid. We cover so many different topics. It's a year-long program or a school year-long program. It's not a huge commitment. We have webinars every 3 to 4 weeks, and then students work on a few different tasks to actually put the skills that they're learning into practice. So if anyone is interested in getting more involved in that, I put the link in the chat, or if you have children or grandchildren or anyone who might be interested, they can fill out the form. It's not an application, it's just kind of an interest form, and then I'll reach out to you with more information. My email is also here. If anyone wants to get in touch, you can just take a screenshot, or I guess I can put it in the chat as well. We're always happy to help if anyone has issues in high school or in university or any other, we can help in all different settings. As I said, we do have a university program as well. So if anyone's in university, you can send me an email and I will, I can connect you with the right person. My email in the chat. So that is our high school program. And then as well, we are on social media. We share a lot of interesting events and webinars that we're hosting, different guest speakers, as well as different opportunities to get involved. So if anyone would like to follow us for more information, we also share, just kind of facts and current events and updates about Israel. So feel free to follow. I guess I'll just leave this up for a minute and then I'll stop sharing so we can see each other for the Q&A. Rabbi Sachs, I got one private message with a question. Do you want me to start with that and then?
Sure. Actually, what we're going to do, because I didn't realize we have Rabbi Walker with us. So what I'm going to tell people to do is we're going to do the questions in the chat. So you can send them to me if you want to keep them private, or you can send them publicly. We're going to really try to take questions from the teens. I know I saw a couple questions that I think came from some of the adults in the room with us, but we want to really try to primarily focus on the teens. But I'm going to let Rabbi Walker share a couple of her own thoughts and struggles and feelings around these issues while people take the time to send any questions that they have, and then we'll start that and let you catch your breath there, Pearl. Thank you so much for that great presentation. Can we make the screen go back so we can put Rabbi Walker up? There we go.
Great. Hello, everyone. Oh, I misfollowed. Okay. Well, thank you first off to Pearl and Rabbi Sachs for this presentation. And something that I've been thinking a lot about these past few weeks is really the emotions involved in this. I think that's something that I really wanted to touch on, is that I know for me, I saw friends from all across the political spectrums posting things that really didn't make me feel good, or made me question things, or felt anti-Semitic, some of them, and I want to say, especially for the teens, that like it's hard and it's complicated, and it's okay not to know, and it's okay also. I think it's great that we're here learning different ways of how to defend Israel, and I think it's also okay to like take more time to learn more and to really do a deep dive and to learn different opinions and different the history, and just to get a really broad understanding of this topic if you feel like you're missing some information, just to keep learning. And Social media is hard. I think, I've definitely seen a lot of infographics. I don't know, the rise of the infographics that really, aren't even true, right? Just because something has a picture with writing on it doesn't mean it's true and it's real. And I know for me, I'm guilty of this as well, as I've definitely reposted infographics on Instagram, maybe not about Israel stuff, but about other things, not really thinking, and then realize that maybe part of the claim has been false. So I think that goes to say that one, to be careful of what we're reading and what we're seeing. And also to give our friends maybe the benefit of the doubt. I know sometimes people, posted something. How many times have you posted something because you felt like you had to post something, and like you felt like, oh, I have to post this on my Instagram, or I have to say something, and don't really put a lot of thought into it. And so I think it's worthwhile to sometimes reach out to a friend if you see someone post something that that bothers you or feel like is anti-Semitic, or you have questions about. I really encourage to reach out, to have those conversations with people you trust, and also to have adults in your life who you can reach out to say, hey, like I saw this thing, I have these questions. And I know for people at Beth David, we're going to have a little debrief after this where we can also have some of that discussion, those questions. But I really encourage you to continue to ask questions and to learn. And it's okay to feel these emotions and to feel confused. And this is something that's hard, right? If it was easy, it would be settled, everything would be great, right? So it's a difficult thing, and just to give you that encouragement that it's okay to feel these emotions, and it's hard, and we're here to support you. So with that, ask questions. You're on mute.
Muted. I was saying amen, right? That's really what this is all about. It's supporting our teens, because I'm an adult, they tell me, and it's really been difficult for me, and I can only imagine for you guys, because I remember when I was your age, Facebook was only permitted for people that went to universities. It did not exist for high schoolers, let alone Instagram and TikTok and all of these other things. And it's really just a whole new realm being a high schooler than it used to be. Pearl, one of the questions that's come up is kind of that, how do you distinguish between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? You touched on it a little bit in your presentation. Maybe you could give us some more about where that Venn diagram overlaps and separates.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and hard. We have a whole kind of 45-minute long presentation on it, so I'm going to try to just give a snippet, and I'd be really happy to come back if people are interested in that topic specifically. I guess we have a few kind of bottom line questions or kind of rules or tests that we can apply that are helpful here. I would say the main kind of, or not the main question, but a really simple question we can ask is this something that we could say about another democracy and it would be considered, and would it be considered racist? So, to blame, an entire religion of people for a specific thing that happened in one country is not something that happens anywhere else. Right now there's a lot of things coming out in the news and the media about how the Uyghur Muslims are being treated in China. And yet it would be absurd to take that out on a random Chinese person walking on the street in Toronto, right? That's not something that, it happens a little bit for sure with extremists, but not to the degree that we see it with Israel and with Jewish people. So that's kind of one question we can ask I guess it's that there's something called the 3D test from Natan Sharansky. And he basically says, if something is demonization, so making Israel out to be way worse than it actually is, like blowing their actions way out of proportion, so that's anti-Semitic. If something is a double standard, so holding Israel to a standard that we would not expect any other comparable democracy in a similar situation to keep to that standard, that is anti-Semitism. So for example, expecting Israel to exercise restraints, which was a common thing we were seeing from politicians, while their citizens were spending 11 days in bomb shelters with 4,000 rockets raining down on their heads, and to be told not to respond to that, that's not something that we would see with any other country. If Canada was doing that to America right now, I don't want to know what would happen to us, right? It's not something that exists. And the last one is delegitimization. So saying that Israel does not have the right to exist. So that's really where kind of anti-Zionism comes into play. We're saying like if anti-Zionism means And it could be there are different people who call themselves anti-Zionist and have different definitions. So I don't want to define that for them. But based on my understanding of kind of the generic term, if Zionism means support for the Jewish people to have to self-determinate, to have kind of their own independence in their in our ancestral indigenous homeland, so then to be anti that would be anti-Semitic. If it means being critical of specific policies, then that would not be. So how can you criticize Israel? How can you actually, criticize without being anti-Semitic? So criticizing Israel's policies, right? People criticize Canada's policies. People definitely criticize America's policies and any other democracy, and that's totally fine. So, criticizing the policies of Israel, totally fine. Criticizing the leadership, again, there are people who criticize very heavily the American, the Canadian, leadership of any democracy, and that's totally fine. Israelis love to criticize, their prime minister. It's like one of their favorite hobbies. Disagreeing with specific policies, with certain actions, holding them accountable for their mistakes, that is all totally fine. But it has to be within the framework of Israel's right to exist. And I think that's really where we incorporate all three of those Ds. So if you say Israel, for example, is a racist country, therefore we should wipe it off the map, that's not something we say about any other country. As much as we criticize, a certain American policy or Canadian or Chinese, we say, let's change the policy, let's change the leadership, let's change this. But we don't say the country should just cease to exist. That would be crazy to say about, Canada, for example. So why can we say that about Israel? So I think if something's within the framework of Israel's right to exist, then it's much more likely to be acceptable than to say, the whole country should just be gone and all the Jews should be gone and whatever, different people put different meanings into that. Then that's really where I think it crosses the line. And the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, has a lot of specific examples that help us to identify that. But I think those are more general tools that we can try to remember. So it's Natan Sharansky's 3D test. And then just sort of the question of, could you say this about another country or another group?
Great. I think we all know it's one thing to correct maybe a friend or, that hippie aunt we have or whatever it is on something that they say something that bothers us, but it's a whole nother thing when it's somebody in a position of power or leadership. And I know that's something I remember in my own days in university all the time, professors would say things, and now I can't imagine with social media seeing what teachers and professors are posting. How do we handle something like that when you see something, but you're afraid to maybe speak up or to say something against it? Are there organizations or people we can go to for help?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the power dynamic definitely comes into play here. We have students dealing with university professors or high school. There have been issues in the TDSB and all these different, school systems. And yeah, it makes sense, because on the one hand, you want to stand up for Israel, but on the other hand, are you going to jeopardize your future, your career, your degree, your grade in this class, which might be really important. So I definitely hear that question. So there are definitely organizations out there to help you. If, things always, generally schools in particular respond better when something comes from the student. So, if you're comfortable putting yourself out there, and definitely getting help, so like Hasbara Fellowships, we are always there to help students. We have students reaching out to us who are in our program, who are not in our program, but have just heard of us. And, that's like what we do all day long, is help students with these kinds of things. So we have certain situations where a student feels comfortable to deal with it, but they don't feel like they have. And I see someone ask that, Karine, like, if you don't have all the facts, what do you do? So we're always there to help students with kind of the information, the resources, if they're really not comfortable. So then we can get involved as outsiders, or we can try to find other students who might be more willing to kind of put themselves out there. So it depends a little bit on, the student's comfort level and the context, but absolutely, we are always there to help. There are other organizations that sort of have different niches. I would say at Hasbara, our focus is schools. So, if it's a workplace thing, if you reached out to us, we could connect you to the right person. That's not so much what we deal with. But when it comes to schools, that is exactly what we're here to do, and what we've been really busy with the last few weeks. And yeah, that's what we're here for. So you can definitely always reach out to us for help with the resources or with actual getting involved. We have a legal team as well that helps us when things are more legal in nature, like writing a lawyer's letter to a school, or helping us if there are actually any kind of crimes at play, but a lot of the time it's more so just explaining that there's another side, and that's what we can help with.
Right. So actually, that's the next question I had. There are a few of those of where do people get resources, and it's great to hear that maybe if they hear something. I remember when I first saw the video going around social media of a Palestinian getting run over by a car, it really was shocking and awful to see until the larger picture came in. So if I'm hearing you correctly, if I saw something like that being posted on social media, I could reach out to you guys to ask what the background is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's wonderful that there are such resources like that. We actually have a student that wanted to share a story of how Hasbara helped them a little bit. So I'm going to pass it over now to Brooke Braverman to help us finish out. So I want to be mindful of the time, but we can always stick around for afterwards if people want to ask any other questions or chat. Brooke.
Sorry. Thank you so much for like coming and like being here. Like I really appreciate it for someone who's been like experiencing like everything on social media with anti like Semitism, anti-Zionism, like all of that stuff. So thank you. I've had 2 experiences from Jews who have posted about anti-Zionist like acts. One was a chat teacher who actually posted a article on, I think it was a Nazi website about how he's blatantly anti-Zionist and he's pro-Palestinian. And it was very like he was like my teacher recently. I literally just finished with him yesterday, and seeing this was like heartbreaking. And like I didn't even want to like talk to him, participate in his class because I was so angry. And the worst thing about it was that like nothing's being like the teachers can't do anything about it. Like no one, the principals are not doing anything about it. And then also I've had another experience in a youth, like in my BYO youth group, that, sorry, I'll answer that later, but that she was posting stuff about Zionist and how she's very pro Palestinian, whatever. And this was also really heartbreaking because she was also Jewish. And then me and my friend like confronted her. We're like, this is anti-Israel. Can you take that off? And she like started like talking to us, and she's like, no, I don't want to. This is like not fair. You can't tell me what to do. And like, this was really like heartbreaking for me to see. And this is why like, it was very like good for you, or like helpful for you to come in today and tell me how to reply to all these social media posts. Yeah.
Thanks, Brooke.
Wow, yeah, thank you.
Pearl, actually, at the beginning, you talked about we're trying to reach the people that haven't made their decisions yet. But how do you balance that of when it's fellow Jews that are making these posts? How should we tackle that? How should we respond to that? Is that worth our time and our anger and our frustration as we see how difficult that is for Brooke? Or
yeah, it's a really
lost cause, and we should focus on people who don't know enough yet, haven't made up their mind.
It's a good question, and it's a really sad question for me. It's something that honestly I haven't really, we always knew these groups existed. They were very much on the fringe, and to see it come so much to the forefront, and to have all these Jewish people who simply just don't know the facts. I don't think that they're staunchly anti-Israel. A lot of them, all they're seeing is the anti-Israel side. And so it definitely has become a bigger issue. My personal view on that is that when it's a Jewish person, we should try a little bit harder. First of all, because like sometimes I try to think, if I genuinely thought that all these things that were being posted were true, and I didn't know any better, and I didn't have the education to, know the facts, I would feel so horrible being Jewish. Like so I think that's where the term, I don't love the term self-hating Jew, but I think that's where it comes from. Like you would really feel like you were part of this awful people. So I think that from that perspective, I think a lot of people, if you can really get things through to them, like they're so happy to hear that it's not true. I've had that myself. My husband's been messaging some people who have like a Jewish, one Jewish parent, but didn't really grow up Jewish or didn't learn the Jewish perspective. And then they think all these things are true. And once they learn that it's not, they're so happy, like they want to learn the other side, but they didn't even know it was out there. So I think from that perspective, it's worth it. And additionally, it looks a lot worse when you have people, and people who are Jewish and like publicly anti-Israel, they always tell you in the first line of their article that they're Jewish, right? So, the more people speaking out like that, that's not good. People throw that in your face. They say, well, the Neturei Karta hates Israel. And we're like, okay, they don't represent, at all the mainstream Judaism. But when there's more and more voices like that, it makes our job a lot harder. So I think for those two reasons, it's worth it. If it gets to the point, like, I think your name's not Brooke. I think maybe that's someone else's name, or if I got that wrong. But what you were saying, sorry, is that sometimes it can be just really exhausting and really, upsetting. So I think you have to take care of yourself as well. And I think that Rabbi Walker brought this up too. You have to take care of yourself. You have to, balance the need for standing up for Israel with also, taking care of your mental health, and whether that means, giving up on one conversation so that you can have another. So, judge it. If they're being really mean and, clearly not open, so then maybe you give up on that one. But if it's someone that you think there might be an opening, then I think that it's more worthwhile, even if they seem like they're in the 8%.
Wonderful. I think that's a great way to end it, because it's difficult. And I know that being a teen and a university student, it's that much harder than it was when I was a kid. And even if your parents don't admit it, it's so much harder than it was when they were your age as well. And we're just bombarded with this now 24/7. Every time your phone buzzes, it's potentially another post from somebody that just breaks your heart. So it's wonderful that we have Pearl with us and Hasbara and these resources to come together and to help support each other and to take care of ourselves, so that we can get through this, and that we can be there for Israel to make sure that she gets through this. And I just love that tonight we have 4 different synagogues partnered on this, and it was a no-brainer, because this is so important to all of us. So we're all here for you guys. You can reach out to your shul. You can reach out to, I'm sure, any of the shuls here tonight. If you need help, you have Hasbara, you have the Federation. There's so many great resources out there for you. So please, please take advantage of it. Pearl, thank you so much for joining us. And to all of our teens and participants, thank you so much for being here and helping us to make this happen. And to our other synagogues that joined Beth Tikva in this endeavor, a big Toda Rabbah. Thank you. And we just pray for peace and harmony and everything else, blessings and blessings. So I'll leave it going. People can stick around if you wanted to chat or say anything else, but I know that our Beth David friends have to jump off. They have a phase 2 they're doing. So thank you so much, Rabbi Walker and Beth David, for joining us, and have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Unfortunately, I have to run to another call, but I just wanted to quickly say, sometimes it feels like when you're trying to advocate and make a difference, especially on social media, it's not making a difference. And sometimes that can be really discouraging. But I just want to put out there that we've had so many messages from our students in the last 2 weeks with successes, with saying, I reached out to this person and turns out they admitted they knew nothing and they deleted their post and now we're having an amazing conversation, or they, made an apology post, or, so it's not going to be everyone, because, that's just the reality. But just because you have a bad experience or the first 2 people you reach out to aren't responsive, just know that you never know when you're going to make a difference. So keep trying.
Everyone else that sees it too, I think, online, that's scrolling through to not
100%.
just one thing on their news feed. I think that's so important.